and welcome back to the first Quaran-stream, RAW Sport Quaran-stream of term 3. This is it's been now a year since I've sat in the chair, and it's been obviously a lot of fun putting these together while we are still nearing the end of the pandemic and maybe nearing the end of the Quaran-stream sort of era, as hopefully we get back into radio studios. But for now, we're still doing these from home. I am your RAW head of sport, Josh Sim, and thank you so much for watching or listening along. Just so you know, we're recording this on a Saturday, but obviously in solidarity with the social media boycott that's taking place across English football, and indeed other sport organizations are taking part in it as well. What will probably happen is that this will come out as a podcast first and then be released as a YouTube video once the boycott sort of ends. But anyway, however you're listening or watching to it, thank you for doing so. And we're just going to talk about all things European Super League and a few other things as well, like the Champions League and Europa League semi-final first legs that took place over the past week. But predominantly the European Super League, we've not reacted to it officially until now. We sort of wanted to wait and see what the fallout was, and there was a lot of fallout that came out of it. So we'll be able to sort of dive into it. And while I personally don't think this is over for the saga, at least we sort of have, a lot of sort of story to tell, at least, and a lot of things to go through with regards to just how it came about and how it collapsed within 72 hours. But yeah, as I said, thank you for joining us. If you're watching on YouTube, you can like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, if you like the episode, you can share it, obviously, and then subscribe to the podcast feed as well. In the video description, our social media links. And recently we've done the Formula One special on previewing the Portimao Grand Prix in Portugal and looking back at Imola. That's out on both YouTube and podcast. As well as the NFL draft, which is sort of in the middle at the moment. It's still going, but obviously the top picks have been picked. Myself and Curtis Long and Riddick Carrier, we previewed it as well as free agency, and amazingly, Curtis got the third pick from the 49ers right. He said it would be Trey Lance would go to the 49ers as the quarterback, and he got it right. So yeah, that's one of the few predictions on this show that is actually come to fruition. So if you want to check that out, why his reasoning for the Niners taking Trey Lance, you can do so by checking out that podcast or YouTube stream. Also, at the time of recording, in the week coming up, you can nominate yourself to be the next head of sport. By-elections are open. If you fancy yourself being a sports host, you fancy doing my job and doing it better, which, yeah, fair enough. I don't have many complaints. As well as covering, the Euros and the Olympics. Fingers crossed about the Olympics. Still sort of in the air at the moment, but fingers crossed. Then yes, you can apply, put yourself down. You can come talk to me if you have any questions or queries about it. And yeah, it's an excellent role. It's something good for your CV as well. There's a lot of just net benefit. So feel free to run. And with that sort of 5-minute introduction wrapped up, let's bring on two panelists who I'm sure have a lot to say about the European Super League. So we'll bring on, and actually both of them have discussed it in past streams. So this isn't a new topic for them either, which should make this a lot of fun. So with me, we have obviously Joe Spagnoli, who joins again. Joe, how are you?
Do you know what, Josh? A couple of days ago, someone messaged me saying that Formula One was my one true love. Football has mostly come ahead of Formula One for most of my life, But oh my God, these last few weeks have tested that. There's a lot to discuss today and not much of it good.
It's been exhausting. It's been fair to say. It's been very exhausting. And it's, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And also our deputy rejoins us, and a Man United fan whose club obviously had a lot of investment in the Super League. Ben Parkinson's with us. Ben, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Josh. There was a lot of disgust, a lot of hatred, mostly towards my own club. But yeah, we'll get into it this episode.
Yeah, so here's the title. Let's talk about the European Super League. So let's dive in, and I'll quickly recap sort of the concept. And we'll start at the start of, I guess, the Sunday night. I think that's when everything sort of the ball started rolling. Let's see. On Sunday, there were multiple reports that 12 teams had agreed to form this European Super League. This would be an independent competition away from UEFA's jurisdiction, away from FIFA's jurisdiction, run by the likes of Juventus president Andrea Agnelli and Manchester United's executive vice chairman Ed Woodward. Both resigned their European Club Association positions to take up a role in running the European Super League. The 12 teams in question are, and as follows: the 6 from England were Manchester United, Manchester City, Chelsea, Liverpool, Arsenal, and Tottenham. We're not here we can debate the makeup of those 6 teams, but those were the 6 teams that were in the league. In Spain, you had 3 representatives. You had Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Atletico de Madrid. And in Italy, you had Juventus, Inter Milan, and AC Milan. There were 3 spots left open, I believe. A lot of people speculated they were being left for Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern Munich, Borussia Dortmund. They were not filled. Those 3 teams opted out of the European Super League, or actually never opted in, just felt it wasn't right for them. So they never joined it in the first place, despite what Florentino Perez said, and we'll get into what Florentino Perez said. But yes, that was the idea and concept. Those 12 teams would never be relegated or kicked out of the competition every year on year. They would stay in. The sort of invited guest teams would be rotated in and out, sort of like a weird game show of sorts. And yeah, this was designed. Obviously, those teams would not be involved in the Champions League. They all said they would be still involved in their domestic leagues, but in the case of the Premier League, that participation was then in question because the Premier League were obviously not very happy about this. But yeah, okay, so that's what it was in concept, I think, in sort of simple layman terms. So we can start with there. Joe, this has been an idea that we've talked about that might come to fruition. Now, granted, I don't think any of us anticipated the speed of how it came about on the Sunday night. What was your reaction to when sort of the report started coming together?
I was, like you, I was surprised that it came out when it did. I would have predicted, and the same goes for Jamie Carragher, Gary Neville, and so many more, that if this was to start, it would have happened after the end of the league season. It's a really bizarre point in the season to announce it, especially when all 6 clubs could and, in my opinion, should be subject to some pretty heavy penalties in the middle of a season. Why not just get it out of the way to make sure that any sanction would be retroactive or just not applied at all? The makeup of the teams, I mean, I'm not going to go into it massively today because even though everything I've said about the Super League in the past ended up being true, namely that it was at least 50% English clubs with potentially more interested, honestly, the implications for football are so bad that I couldn't even celebrate on my own, let alone gloat to anyone else. I was that mad about it. But it was good to see that Gary Neville saved his absolute best analysis for this, labelling the ownerships of those 6 clubs as bottle merchants. Predictably, they were the first clubs to jump when they realised that perhaps this TV money wouldn't last as long as they thought it would.
Yes, and I will, in a second, I will get together the sort of statement made on their website. But a side note, the logo and the website created were not that impressive. No offense.
We don't even know what it was called.
No.
For years, it was the European Super League. Then it was the Super League. Even in their official correspondence, they were still referred to it as the European amateurs.
Let's go to Ben. Same question. I mean, what was your reaction to the news on Sunday? And then we'll talk about it a bit more. But Ben, as a fan of one of the 12 clubs involved, was this an exciting prospect for you, or was this I don't know, was this disappointing to find out that your club was involved in this?
Yeah, I think I was disgusted and ashamed, especially I think as it came out in the half time of a Manchester United game. I was then from there on disinterested in the game completely. I've never once in all my years being alive questioned my support for a club, but I said, obviously, if this carries through and or it carries to a certain extent, I will no longer support Manchester United, because I don't want anything to do with a club that would want to be involved in something such as a Super League. I think pretty much I share the same reaction as Joe, as you, Josh, as absolutely anyone who is a football fan. And I say football fan because the owners of these clubs are not football fans. And that is why it came about, because they clearly don't understand the culture that we have ingrained here. So I think, yeah, just I felt really ashamed of the club I support. I felt disgusted. I was willing to say, massive punishments, relegate them, deduct points from them. I don't care. If that happens now, I still, as a Manchester United fan, if we're not in the Champions League, if we were relegated, which I know is not going to happen, I wouldn't care, because I feel like that's just. And I think that's the thing. It was the only positive that came across was sort of, for once in my life, I probably saw completely eye to eye with Liverpool, Manchester City supporters. And probably the unity that came across. That's the one positive I can get from this whole thing. That's the only thing. And like Joe said there, sort of Gary Neville, Jamie Carragher, some real kind of leaders in football really emerged from this. It's the only positive, because I mean, this is probably one of the biggest scandals that has ever happened in football.
Yeah. So here was the statement from the European Super League's sort of press release that came out. The website is still intact, by the way. But anyway, the formation of the Super League comes at a time when the global pandemic has accelerated the instability in the existing European football economic model. Further, for a number of years, the founding clubs have had the objective of improving the quality and intensity of existing European competitions throughout each season, and of creating a format for top clubs and players to compete on a regular basis. The pandemic has shown that a strategic vision and a sustainable commercial approach are required to enhance value and support for the benefit of the entire European football pyramid. In recent months, extensive dialogue has taken place with football stakeholders regarding the future format of European competitions. The founding clubs believe the solutions proposed following these talks do not solve fundamental issues, including the need to provide higher quality matches and additional financial resources for the overall football pyramid. So that is 2 bits of the statement. And in regards to Joe, you mentioned the timing. Do you, and I sort of believe this because it sounds like a conspiracy theory I can get behind. We'll dive into what Alexander Seferin's sort of mentioned later, but this did feel like, a rush on a Sunday night, with knowing that the vote on the Champions League changes was coming in on the Monday, sort of a rush to get ahead of them, at least to beat them in terms of getting their ideas out to the public. And yeah, that's what it seemed like to me. Do you agree with that sort of notion?
I wouldn't agree with the idea that it was very rushed and spontaneous. I do agree with you that they were trying to rush against the Champions League changes versus the Champions League changes in terms of the time of the announcement. However, the tacit truth is that a lot of these clubs will support these changes in the Champions League, not as much as a breakaway Super League, but with the historical coefficients and more slots for the top 5 nations and the larger amount of teams in the competition, teams finishing 5th in their domestic leagues being allowed into the Champions League, it suits them down to a T. So maybe it's not the number one thing they wanted, but it's pretty high up on things that they would have liked. It certainly suits them a darn sight more than clubs lower down the football pyramids that they claim to support so much. They were very clearly coordinated. Like when I did my Super League rant, must have been January December now. I honestly can't remember. I forecasted, the 6 English clubs were involved then. It was pretty certain that at least Real Madrid and then Barcelona. You could then add Atletico in. From Italy, it was pretty clear where the interest was coming from and then limited there. So if you'd have asked me to say who the 12 clubs were, I think I would have been at least 10 out of 12. The big surprise, and maybe we'll talk about this a bit later, is Paris Saint-Germain having nothing to do with it. I have gained a lot of support for that club. Not support, respect. But
well, we'll dive into sort of the politics, because I think PSG and Bayern both benefited politically from this, in terms of now having greater influence with UEFA per se. So you support me here, we'll support you here. I feel like it was a win for them. But Ben, it's interesting how much emphasis of this was put on the pandemic and its effects, whereas clearly, we've suspected that this was in the making before the pandemic. How much do you? I don't want to say do you buy that this was all down to the pandemic, because I don't think you do. But like, how much of this do you think was accelerated maybe because of the pandemic that happened?
I'm glad you asked me this, Josh, because this is something I've done a lot of research into, and something that you have to try and say without getting too emotional. Because if you think about it, so these talks, there is evidence, a lot of evidence, that they started before the pandemic. So for these clubs to come out and say that this is because of the pandemic, we're almost forced into this decision because of the pandemic, is utter rubbish, and it's disgusting, because people have lost their lives in this pandemic. Thousands of people have died. Small businesses have failed. And that's not just small football clubs, that's small businesses, that's cafes, that's everything across the globe, not just in the UK. So to sit there and use that as a lame excuse is disgusting. I think that's horrific. You're literally stamping on people who've lost their lives. It's absolutely awful. And there's nothing more I can say about that, because it actually does. That's one of the things that probably the thing that has upset me the most about the whole situation.
Yeah, and I'll quickly, Joe, I'll let you weigh in the subject. Just quickly, you're talking about, and at least I have no idea about the other teams, but we know for a fact that Liverpool and Tottenham both tried to furlough their employees at one stage during the pandemic, and then were forced into sort of U-turns due to a backlash. So just to add in on that point, I guess, on how maybe clubs are not really knowing what they've got their priorities mixed up. They're not really focusing on where they should be. But Joe, you wanted to weigh in on that?
Yeah, just to add on to that little point, Josh, it's very rich of them. Arsenal, pride of North London, making dozens and dozens of staff redundant, not even furlough, and then giving Willian a £12 million annual contract as a free agent just a week later. Just adding on to what Ben said, these clubs, yeah, they have been hit hard by the pandemic. The debts of a lot of these clubs have gone through the ceiling. However, especially when it comes to the British top 6/big 6, the amount of TV money that they get alone, plus, success, like TV rights money from European competitions, they should not be in that much debt. It speaks to some really questionable investments from the ownerships of these teams. The wage situation, which, by the way, the Super League would have made infinitely worse. And I will just return to what I said back then. And this applies to all of the clubs in the Super League within their domestic competitions. Obviously, I've talked at length about how the English clubs have a financial advantage and how the Super League financially would massively benefit Atletico, Inter, clubs like that, far more so, proportionally speaking, than these clubs in the top 6. In terms of the money that they already get, these are the clubs that have been the least affected by the pandemic. With articles all the way through last year, not it just the human cost, the clubs in as high as League One, the third tier of the English football pyramid, seeing no futures in the short to medium term. That's in the UK, where there's a lot of money and it goes quite far down the football pyramid. That's how bad it is. I dread to think what it's like in the Spanish lower levels. I can tell you now that a club as high as the Serie C in Italy got excluded, Trapani, because they just could not field players. That's as a result of the pandemic. These clubs at the top, they're still paying players ludicrous wages. Very few of them offered punitive wage sanctions on their players, despite the fact they weren't playing. So many of them made staff redundant. It is, as Ben said, that I'm not even going down the humanitarian argument of this and what an insult it is. And Ben's right to do that. Just in terms of the financial hypocrisy, it's ridiculous. You can't say this is as a result of the pandemic. These clubs were in massive amounts of debt beforehand. That's not COVID-19. That's just horrendous ownership and massive overspending on both player amortization and wages. And God only knows how much else.
Yeah, to add on that, I know this hasn't been confirmed yet by club or player, but it's widely reported that David Alaba is heading to Real Madrid on a free transfer with wages that could be up to 12 million euros, if I'm correct. I think that's the figures sort of being reported. So again, you can cry wolf and then sort of under the radar just pop in this move here that obviously contradicts your point. But going off again, I'm going off the Super League website for this next sort of little bit, but the solidarity payments that was sort of going to be provided by these 12 clubs to their respective leagues or countries was expected to be in excess of 10 billion euros. And in exchange for their sort of commitment for that payment, founding clubs would receive an amount of 3.5 billion for their own needs. And we know that for a fact that American investment bank JP Morgan was involved in funding this competition. So that's sort of more of the economic details of how it was going to work. I don't really know. What I will say is I think if not JP Morgan, I feel like some bank was going to do this, because you get pitched an idea and you invest and you think it's a strong investment, you'd invest in it. And I don't sort of blame maybe JP Morgan, maybe, I don't know, they didn't know about what the ramifications could be, but I certainly, if they get pitched on something, it's hard not to see why they wouldn't take it if they thought it was a strong investment for their own business. So I sort of condone whatever threats have been made against JP Morgan employees or JP Morgan, etc. But that was sort of so their solidarity payments, as I said, were sort of promised. Clubs would get 3.5 billion euros. So let's talk about maybe the perspective of all the domestic. Well, let's talk about the domestic leagues. So we'll start with. I've got a statement here. Well, okay, from the UK, we had Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden, who in response said, we will put everything on the table to prevent this from happening. We are examining every option. You obviously had a YouGov poll of football fans. 79% found they were opposed to this competition. 68 said they were strongly opposed. Obviously, Boris Johnson, British Prime Minister, also voiced his disapproval for this proposal for this Super League. Although at the time of recording, there's a lot of discussion around conversations he may or may not have had with Ed Woodward in Downing Street. So we won't comment on those because that's still speculation. But let's think about if this Super League was to happen, and obviously, first of all, Ben, do you feel like it was correct for the Premier League to sort of, or the other 14 clubs to then hold that position of, we will kick you out of the Premier League if you go ahead with this? Do you think that was a decision you would have agreed with if the Super League had gone ahead with?
Yeah, I would have agreed, because I think you do need sort of the harshest punishment. The problem is that obviously the Premier League isn't the Premier League without those 6 clubs. And those 6 clubs were sort of banking on the fact that they would be able to, people would realize that and then they'd be able to stay. But I think it just had to be if you engage with this, then you are out, which I think had to happen. Obviously, the government didn't end up needing to get involved with this, which I actually think, not to get too political, was a bit of a cop out for them, because they could very sternly say they disagree and not actually have to do anything. But I think, I thought that it wouldn't get all the way through. I agree. I listened to Jamie Carragher a lot, and I agree with him. I think the sort of opposition of the fans, the opposition of the other clubs and the players for those clubs, they'd prevent this. And obviously, if it went to government as well, they could easily do things. For example, take sort of publicly funded police away from the grounds, and I mean the grounds will probably get destroyed by fans. So I think there was definitely sort of ways to combat it, but I think the main problem isn't necessarily the Super League. It's sort of the civil war as a whole, sort of this kind of branch between owners who have nothing to do with their clubs, see these clubs as an investment project, and don't actually understand not only the culture of the club, but the culture of English football as a whole. I think that's the main problem. So for me, I always saw them as two issues. And I think just sort of off air before we started recording this, Joe sort of alluded to this a little bit. Yes, we kind of won this little battle, but the problem's still there. And I think that's the way I sort of tried to think of it throughout the whole thing. I never thought this would get the whole way through as soon as the Premier League said this statement, as soon as UEFA said players wouldn't be able to play internationally. I sort of thought, okay, I don't think this will get through this time, but this time. And I think something else will come up again. If it happens. And it's like what sort of Gary Neville said when he talked about Manchester United. You got to go for the roots, and the roots are the owners. And I think that's for pretty much the majority of these clubs involved. This won't go away with these owners here. And even if an independent regulator comes in, I strongly believe this, it won't go away until these owners aren't there, because I think they want one thing. They don't care about public image. They don't care about what the fans want. They want one thing, and they got to be billionaires because they are just innately selfish people. So I think it will always be a problem in that sense. But yeah, sort of I've dived away a little bit from the question. Yeah, I think it was definitely needed. I think everything needed to be pulled out here to try and prevent these clubs from going any further.
No, we will certainly dive into the future of the concept, because like you said, I don't think the three of us believe it's going away anytime soon. But just going off, I mean, there were obviously strong reactions across the 14 teams, from Ralph Hasenhüttl to Leeds chairman owner Andrea Radicchio, Karen Brady of West Ham. Although, and you have to remember, obviously, these clubs are speaking of from self-interest. Karen Brady, let's be honest, was one of the people who said the league last season should be completely stopped, annulled, and at the time West Ham were in relegation trouble. So that I mean, comments from her I sort of take as not self-interest, but obviously acting from the club's West Ham's own self-interest. But anyway, that's another point. Joe, I mean, what about you? Do you feel like, and I don't think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think La Liga or Serie A had gone as far as making that threat to their teams, or at least from my standpoint, it wasn't reported that way. Do you agree that the Premier League sort of had to make, and the 14 clubs sort of had to make a stand and say, look, if you go to the Super League, then you can't just waltz back into the Premier League. We have to kick you out.
I think the attitude, at least in terms of clubs and the leadership structures of the leagues in particular, if not the wider federations of the RFEF and the FIGC, I don't think, as far as I understand it, and obviously the majority of the coverage that I've seen has been from this country because I live in the UK, and as I say, half the clubs involved in this competition were the English Big Six. So it was quite similar over there. What I do know has happened, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think it's the clubs in Serie A have either voted or they are in the process of voting for procedures whereby if a club breaks away into a breakaway competition, either from the FIGC or indeed from UEFA, that they'd be immediately banned from any domestic competition. So if this was to happen again, Juve, AC Milan and Internazionale would be gone on the spot. I don't know if the Premier League the owners have put together something like this. And to be honest, Josh, you're absolutely right when you say that people like Karen Brady, it's very rich for them to talk about it. And I dare say that a lot of the clubs who have been, purportedly against this would have had a very different position if they'd been invited. It's why my club AS Roma, our ownership was surprisingly strongly against it right from the off. However, I'm not going to congratulate them on that. A, because it's the absolute bare minimum, and B, because if we'd been invited, which we absolutely do not deserve to be, I get the impression the response would have been very different. Just to finish off on this point, because there is something about the British government about this. People saying, oh, well, what can the British government do? They need to do more. In the wake of leaving the European Union, the Home Office, as far as I understand it, has to approve work permits for any player signed in the EU or beyond. If the British government wants to punish clubs that are betraying the soul of English domestic football, they can very easily deny work permits to foreign players from those clubs, stopping them from signing players at ridiculous transfer fees from other countries. It's really not that difficult for the British government to do that. And honestly, with some of the rhetoric that's come out of them over the last few years, it's kind of surprising that they haven't already taken that stance. And it is also very rich. I know we're in another financial crisis, the second of most of our lifetimes, but it is worth pointing out that the stimulus package for lower league football that the British government managed to cough up in the end, months after it was really required, was £30 million. If every Premier League club gave £1.5 million, you would get the same amount. This isn't just me slagging off the Premier League. It's very rich of the British government, the incumbent British government, to claim they care about the soul and the pyramid of English domestic football when they were able to cough up something that in the long run just is not going to help at all.
Yeah, a couple of responses. At first, I thought you were talking about Project Big Picture, which I know EFL, the head of the EFL, Rick Parry, is keen to resurrect, which maybe he's jumped the gun on that one. Maybe not now, but going off your point about the Home Office, absolutely. I mean, even, with Brexit now obviously has happened, it's already difficult to bring in players from foreign countries. Like the qualifications, like you have to be an international, I believe, or sort of there's certain merits to the criteria that you have to be an exceptional talent to be given a permit. So it's a really difficult one. Yes, it's a point I didn't really think about. I can certainly imagine for Home Office doing something like that. And you are right on the Italian clubs. They have passed through the Federal Council of the Italian Football Federation have put through rules that say if those who participate in competitions that are not authorized by the Italian Football Federation, FIFA or UEFA will lose their membership. And I suspect a vote of that nature will be looked at across the continent, pretty much. Well, England and Spain. I would be very surprised if they didn't look to try to do that. We know that, and I know we'll talk about the fallout in a second, but we know that the 6 breakaway English teams have lost their position on the Premier League board. Like they've lost some sort of power-making position on the Premier League board or something of that kind. So I wouldn't be surprised if the other 14 quickly sort of put together some sort of vote similar to that and made that stick to, I guess, guard against future moves like this. So yeah, obviously a lot of people, the Monday, I guess the sort of the meme culture that we live in the 21st century obviously sparked into life. I think, let me look at the Premier League table. I just want to check who exactly, if you removed the big 6, I think Leicester would be winning the table.
Leeds would be in the Champions League places, wouldn't they?
Be the table right now, as of now, would be Leicester, West Ham, Everton, and Leeds as the top 4. And then the next being Villa, Wolves, and Crystal Palace. But obviously there was a lot of things, like I think Southampton said, like they were the whatever season they came 7th, they would be champions if the top 6 were gone. And Leicester put out some similar jokes. So there was some good stuff in Spain as well. I think Real Betis were very quick on the hands of that as well. So yeah, so it did obviously, it'd been interesting to see what obviously, certain other clubs of the 14 would have benefited from joining the Champions League and the reformed Champions League, as we'll mention in a bit. But we'll fast forward to when, I think it was Tuesday afternoon, in which the Chelsea fans protested on the streets. I think it was a Tuesday, before their match against Brighton, I believe, at home. And you had images of Petr Cech coming out to greet sounds positive, to meet the fans and sort of talk to them. And then the bombshell news came out that Chelsea they were the first ones to withdraw from the Super League. And then a few hours later, Manchester City sort of followed them. Now, granted, from what we're led to believe, those 2 teams entered the league quite late compared to some of the 12 teams. So maybe from what their sort of leaving statements were, they seemed quite reluctant. Well, they painted themselves as being quite reluctant to joining it in the first place, and then realizing the severity of their decision. But yeah, so I mean, Ben, what was your reaction to how the events at sort of Stamford Bridge, and then sort of then the news that came out that Chelsea were to exit, and then Manchester City who followed them?
Yeah, I think all it took would be sort of one club to sway, and then there's the domino effect, and they all would. So I think it was nice to see when Chelsea came through, because I think that's when people started realizing, okay, this small battle has been won. But I think, I mean, there was that sort of little bit of a debate. Maybe Jurgen Klopp kind of started it as well. Like, it's not really fair on the players necessarily, because it's not their views and everything, and you're taking it out on the players. And yeah, I sympathise with that a little bit, that, they were blocking kind of the Chelsea bus, and there were the T-shirts to the players and stuff. However, I still believe that it just needs to happen. I think it needed to happen. It doesn't matter. I think all football fans know it's not the players' fault, but they still sort of just need to make their point and go and protest. And whether that's blocking the Chelsea team bus, it's blocking the Chelsea team bus. Deal with it. I think that's what has to happen when your club releases something like that. So I think it was definitely important in that sense. I think all six clubs, and I'm speaking for the English clubs, there isn't a ranking system of someone was worse than the other, because I think, a lot of people have said, oh yeah, but Chelsea and Man City, they just had a sort of a fear of being left behind, and they wanted to join in. So you're telling me that just because of a little bit of FOMO, they thought they needed to leave. They needed to potentially leave the Premier League, leave the Champions League, and join the European Super League. I don't buy that. I think that they've still done something that's, they're just as horrific as the others. But I do put sort of the teams into brackets, in the sense that I think the Manchester United and Liverpool, for me, are in a whole kind of definitely evil bracket. I think Manchester United, it's obviously poor ownership, and it's been like that from the start, and I can definitely delve into that later. And I think Liverpool as well, when your club's anthem is "You Never Walk Alone," I mean, the owners of that club have gone completely against that anthem, which I think is one of the probably worst things that those owners could have done. So they're in probably the top bracket for me. I then think there's Manchester City and Chelsea, and this mostly applies to Manchester City, but I question their involvement at all. They're independently funded, from a country. And I struggle to see what they gain from it. I think it's really weak if they joined because of fear of missing out, because I think they'd be financially better off not being in it, surely, because they don't want other teams to get loads of money. They comfortably sit probably the richest in the Premier League, so surely they'd want to just keep that. And whilst Manchester United and Liverpool don't benefit at all. So I struggle to see that one. Same-ish with Chelsea. I know it's not as much money, but it's still a hell of a lot with Abramovich. So I don't get them. And then I think Spurs and Arsenal, I mean, are lucky to be here. I mean, how the hell did they get invited? I don't understand. I think Gary Neville said something like he'd rather watch the champions of North Macedonia play than those two at the moment, and I completely agree. I think they'd be sort of two of the last clubs in form at the moment I'd want to invite into that Super League. So I think, I separate them into the three brackets there, but I think they're all equally as bad as each other in terms of what's gone on. But yeah, I think it was definitely, I think it was going to collapse as soon as you saw that sort of Stamford Bridge protest. I think I think even before that, I think there was a Liverpool game on the Monday, and I saw own Liverpool fans burning a Liverpool shirt, which I thought was incredibly symbolic. And I think the moment I saw that, I was like, yes, this won't go all the way through. But yeah, I think still all clubs equally as accountable. Doesn't matter if you pulled out first, doesn't matter if you joined last. I think, you all deserve sort of the same punishment and sort of same disgust from all of football.
Yeah, there's a few things I sort of want to unpack there from what you've said, but like sort of things have just come to mind. I've just put down, for those watching on YouTube, I've put down the details of sort of how the domino effect sort of then has happened. And as you can tell, there are 3 dominoes still up, 3 teams who are still sort of haven't publicly decommitted themselves from the competition. Although, it's as we'll get into, leaving the Super League apparently isn't as straightforward as some people want to make us believe. But yeah, it was a big moment on Tuesday when Manchester City left. And Joe, I don't know. Do you want to weigh in as to why? Do you want to share maybe to people who may not know as to why those two teams, or at least the owners of those two teams, felt I don't know. It was for them. They had less at stake and involved in the competition, and why they maybe chose to leave earlier than, say, some of the other teams we've talked about.
It's very interesting. It's not a perfect mirror image, but if you look at the interest in the Super League over the last few years, not just the last few months, the clubs that joined this later on, or seemed, to paraphrase Ben, the flakiest in terms of their interest, namely Chelsea and Man City, the clubs that joined latest were the first to jump ship when it started to go down the pan. I've said in the private chat that the quote-unquote oligarch owners, you've got the Abu Dhabi group who preside over Manchester City and about 6 other clubs in major domestic competitions worldwide. Then you've got the Russian ownership of Chelsea versus a lot of the other clubs who obviously have American ownership, and obviously with an American investment bank, a quasi-American no relegation structure. It's easy to see not just the financial reasons, but why FSG, the Glazers, the American ownership of AC Milan, they would all be in favour of this. The only teams that are left at this stage, obviously, Florentino Perez, the person who created the idea, who presides over Real Madrid. It's not like he's going to leave. Andrea Agnelli, who's been, I think, the worker in making this happen and has been the guy responsible for converting so many of these clubs from across the continent. But Barcelona, you say they haven't left. The truth is they haven't really joined either. As far as I understand it, the Barcelona political structure is that it's not just Joan Laporta, the new president's decision. It has to go through all the club socios. And I understand it. It still hasn't, I don't think. So really, it was 11 clubs officially in, with Barcelona with a little asterisk next to them. I'm not saying they'd turn that down, but Barcelona haven't been as into it as the other clubs were. It's just, if I may, I'll just read a few tweets that came out when this started going down. So Jake Paul Design says, sorry, just because Chelsea bottled it first doesn't mean they're the saviours of football. They still signed up for it in the first place. All 6 should still get the book thrown at them. And above all, that's Matteo Bonetti, who I don't normally listen to because he's an AC Milan fan. The only teams you should be praising right now are the ones that said no from the beginning, not the ones that are coming back now with the tails between their legs. I think that's all I really have to say, at least at the moment. The very quick revisionism, not on the part of the fans, to be fair, but on the part of especially the British mainstream broadcasters towards these top 6 clubs, it all seems to have just been ignored pretty quickly. And in a few minutes, I will probably go into a minor rant on Graham Souness's comments in particular, which are some of the most insulting I've seen for quite a long time. There you are.
Wow, you've caught me. I'm trying to look for Rory Times, the correspondent at the New York Times. His tweet that I sort of agreed with in regards to sort of the innocence or perceived innocence of clubs like Chelsea and Manchester City who left early. And you are correct. I should say that Barcelona obviously it's very much, I don't know, that basically what would have happened was Laporta's proposal. The proposal would have then gone to a vote by the socios. I think that's what they referred to. And members would have had a chance to vote, and they could have voted to decline the proposal, and Laporta wouldn't be seen as... It was sort of an interesting political position Laporta was put in. I sort of think he might have come out pretty well, considering Bartomeu had sort of signed the club up to the proposal, and he was sort of inherited that sort of proposal that was already signed off by Barcelona. So I think Laporta actually did pretty well from a political standpoint. But anyway, yes, in regards to all your points, yes, I think Chelsea, Manchester City, obviously their owners had significantly less at stake, so it made sense. And then, as you then saw, the remaining English clubs left. Maybe we can dive into some of their apology statements. Ben, I am keen to hear from you about what Joel Glazer had to say, and then also the fact that Ed Woodward. Now, it's widely disputed as to, was Ed Woodward in favor of it? Was he not in favor of it? Because I've seen conflicting reports, and I'm not obviously this is politics playing out in the media. I don't really know where Ed Woodward sort of stood with the proposal, but I don't know. Just I'm keen to hear from you about sort of the fallout from a Manchester United sort of executive perspective.
Yeah, I mean, regarding the Glazers, I think that's the second time they've come out and made a statement in their whole ownership. So I think I couldn't care less, to be honest, about what they say. If I'm honest, I haven't even read it. That's how much I care. And I think it's the same with every Manchester United fan. I could not care less what he says. So I think actions speak louder than words and always have done. So I think regarding Ed Woodward, I try and, you know what, with him, I've seen a lot of the mixed reports too. And I think he did have a good relationship with a few of the players. I know that was true. So I don't know whether he would have been against it or wouldn't have. I think, not going to lie, the most likely thing with his character would have been he would have sat on the fence because he would want to please the Glazers and wouldn't want to sort of displease the players. So I think in that sense, he probably sat on the fence. But there's so much more to judge in his time at Manchester United. And I think it has been horrific, really. I think it's been awful. And, you know, this is sort of 50% of me angry at him and blame him for, you know, a lot of the sort of poor seasons that we've had. But also 50% I do feel sorry for him, because I think when he was appointed, obviously, you know, you have sort of this new era after David Gill and Sir Alex Ferguson. It's, you know, it's extremely hard to sort of fulfill those shoes. However, that doesn't excuse how poorly he did do. But I think it didn't help when you choose, obviously, David Moyes. He's done so well, obviously, at West Ham now. But at Manchester United, it just probably wasn't the right fit. And I think that's the same with Ed Woodward. I think when you're sort of going into sort of a new kind of partnership, you either need to keep David Gill on and have a new manager, or a manager who knows Manchester United inside out, and then Ed Woodward to show him what to do. I think you had two inexperienced guys at the same time, and that got him off to the complete wrong foot. You know, he's a business guy, and he was brought into Manchester United to sort of, you know, make money. And I think that the main route of being able to sort of make money and maximize profits, that was for the Glazers. That's because they want all the profit and they always take it. So I think, that he was basically working for the Glazers. But even before that, he's working from a business perspective and running a football club. His position in the club was fine. It is fine to have a chief executive who does what he does. And he did some good things. He did achieve maximizing profits. I mean, I think we've just got a new sponsor, TeamViewer, and I think that's the largest sort of there's ever been. Largest deal there's ever been in terms of shirt sponsors in the Premier League. And he did various other things as well, which were financially okay. And I think in that sense, he did do what was asked of him. So it was actually those who maybe appointed him were more of the problem. Regards to the footballing side, I think it's an embarrassment. I mean, I've talked about thinking back to our recruitment policy. I mean, getting like Radamel Falcao on loan and signing Angel Di Maria when Van Gaal specifically plays with a no dribbling style. He says he doesn't want anyone to dribble, and you sign Angel Di Maria. I think that is utter stupidity. I have no idea what was going on in that transfer, and that stands for sort of various transfers as well. I mean, Daley Blind, Marcus Rojo. I mean, who are these guys? And I mean, it's got, no disrespect to them, and it's got and Jose said in the chat, Van der Beek. Clearly, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer didn't want him. Quite clearly, I think, you know, it did get better with the signings of sort of Wan-Bissaka and Edison Cavani, if we've just seen now. But I still think when you run the club from a business perspective, you're not gonna get anywhere in terms of a league title. And if you want to maximize profits, you got to win stuff. So I think that, you know, in that sense, he didn't achieve what he was set out to do. I feel sorry for him because I think he was thrown into the deep end. I think the structure of the club should have been different, and I don't think he was expecting himself to be involved with the amount of football he had to. But that just shows the poor structure of Manchester United. However, I still think footballing wise, he's not good enough to be in that position in a hell of a lot of clubs, let alone Manchester United, who's arguably were the biggest club in the world. So I think, in that sense, I'm happy for him to go. I know most Manchester United fans are, but again, sounds like I'm sort of echoing Gary Neville every time I speak, but he did speak really well, and he does speak really well about Manchester United. Ed Woodward's the trunk. Manchester United fans now need to go for the roots. They need to clear out. These owners have got to go. I think the Glazers are the worst owners, worst football club owners. I genuinely believe that, and I'd ask anyone to challenge me otherwise. They bought the club and put their own debt on the club. We've been having sort of, obviously we wouldn't use all of this in transfer budget, but there was money there available. Apparently 900 million was available in the season before the pandemic. They gave us 150 million. And I know 150 million is a lot, and Edward would spend that appallingly. Don't get me wrong. However, 900 million and 150 million. So the Glazers are pocketing 750 million. That is absolutely outrageous. And you can say what you want about the Cronkies at Arsenal taking their money, of course, but it's not that amount. It is absolutely ridiculous. And they won't sell soon either. That's the probably most depressing thing as a Manchester United fan. I think the stock prices or something have gone down since the Super League. So it looks like we're going to be stuck here for a bit longer. But I think, yeah, these are the worst owners in football. But regards to Ed Woodward's little plus there, but you've got to go for the roots now, Manchester United fans. I think, protests still need to happen.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that perspective. It's interesting, right, with the Glazers, because obviously I know the NFL has a salary cap, but they've just produced a Super Bowl winning team on that end, paying for Tom Brady and for all those, the receivers that he's needed. And yet, it's such a contrast to how they've run Manchester United. But yeah, as far as your sort of are their worst owners, I know some Arsenal fans who maybe are watching or listening may put up Kroenke. Obviously, that's obviously now Kroenke's position is under question with obviously Spotify's founder and chief executive officer Daniel Ek, I think is how you pronounce his last name, looking to buy the club. We shall see if that comes to fruition or not. I'll quickly just speak from this as from a Liverpool fan perspective. People want John Henry out and Fenway Sports Group, and that's going to be interesting to see how they do, because I don't think they've been the worst owners, because I think they've obviously bankrolled on pitch success, but I think they've had some massive own goals off the pitch. Furlough employees, they tried to trademark the word Liverpool, which obviously wasn't going to work. Do you remember that, Joe? Yeah, there you go.
I've not even heard of this. What are they going to call parliamentary constituencies then?
I don't know. You think? I mean, all the sort of merchandise sellers of Liverpool merchandise were then going to have to. It was very messy, and it didn't pay off clearly. Where else? The lack of investment in the women's team for Liverpool compared to, you look at how Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester City, Manchester United, Tottenham, all those clubs in that sort of big six have produced if not great teams, have obviously invested heavily, and Liverpool haven't, and that's quite damning. Season ticket prices. There's a lot of own goals that FSG have had off the pitch, and that's why I can say I've never been satisfied with their ownership, which is a shame, because they've obviously produced Liverpool's first Premier League title ever and first league title in over 20 years or so, but that's sort of the state of affairs. So we'll be...
Can I jump in on that quickly? Because there's one other thing. This is one of my big bugbears in not just this country's football, but the big clubs in football in general, is the wages. Now, Liverpool's the gross player wages at the start of the year, and I actually used to credit them on this. Luke Edwards, a former station manager of RAW, and massive Liverpool fan who's never hated the club more than he currently does, was saying to me that basically the gross salaries of most Liverpool players are actually quite low. The majority for a lot of them actually comes in the form of performance-related bonuses. Yeah, as a result of how well Liverpool have done in the last couple of years, it's a horrible way to run your wage structure. The wage bill has gone massive because of what they've achieved over the last couple of years. It's just such a short-termist approach. It's like, I'm not saying they're the only offenders. Do not even get me started in the contracts that United gave to Mkhitaryan and to Alexis Sanchez and God knows how many others. Ben can give you the laundry list on that. But in terms of short-termist financial mismanagement, it's just ridiculous the way FSG went for that. And again, it just seems like a very American way of doing it. Let's dodge the salary cap by giving players enormous bonuses that can't be tracked.
I mean, it's why, there's been no news on Wijnaldum's new contract. That's still being sorted out. And, we're in May. We're recording this on the 1st of May, and in 2 months' time, he's a free agent. So, yeah. I mean, I will say, I don't know. That's a discussion for another time, whether bonus fueled contracts are better than obviously big wages. Like Chelsea are paying, I think, close to 200 grand a week for Callum Hudson-Odoi or something like that. Like he's on a very high wage structure. Ben's nodding, so I think that's right.
It's ridiculously high. It was when Bayern Munich were coming in for him. That's what they came up with.
Yeah, no, they're paying big money for him. Obviously, you contrast that with Tottenham, who are quite who don't like spending big on their wages. But somehow, I mean, well, we'll see. Harry Kane's future is another discussion for another day. Whether at some point he snaps and decides to go, and indeed the situation at Tottenham maybe. But
they do still pay loads though.
Absolutely.
They are small spenders by comparison to the other big five, and like Real Madrid, Barcelona, relative to other clubs of their quality. I have to be honest, they still spend way too much.
Absolutely, they've got a biggish squad anyway, so yeah, it's not a surprise. But yeah, it's wage mismanagement. What I'm trying to say is an issue at most clubs, and even teams outside the big six. So again, we can have that. That's a bigger discussion we can probably have another time. But yeah, I think we've summed up sort of the fallout. It's interesting. I think Rory Smith, New York Times, he tweeted out that I think Arsenal were the only club to say sorry in their sort of leaving statements. I think all the other 5 clubs didn't apologize or didn't use words to that effect, which is quite telling. But yes, so that was the English fallout. And we can talk about what comes next in a second. But I just want to briefly branch off into what remains of the Super League and that of Mr. Florentino Perez, who when he made, I think he's had 2 big interviews on Spanish radio or Spanish TV that have sort of gone viral for in my Twitter sphere, at least, the wrong reasons. I mean, yeah, actually, yeah, Ben, when you sort of saw things that Florentino Perez was saying, what was your reaction?
Something I can't say on air, if I'm honest, the names I was calling, but I think, oh God, yeah, this has to be the big bad wolf of football. I think he must be one of the most hated men in football now. And I think I agreed with, I think it was Kave Sodokol from Sky Sports said this. Florentino Perez came out and said football needs saving, and I think he said football doesn't need saving. And if football did need saving, Florentino Perez is the last person anyone would go to save it. And I think that sums it up perfectly. I think this guy tries to present himself as a speaker on all clubs, for all clubs football as a whole. And I think he overestimates how much more powerful he is. And I think he's arrogant. I think he is the epitome of the Super League. Florentino Perez is the Super League. And I think, yeah, I mean, to be a Real Madrid fan, that must be painful, knowing that he is at your club. So I think, other than sort of just sheer disgust at him and some of the ridiculous sort of cries he was saying, he was the first one, I think, who came out and started almost kind of blaming the pandemic, which I've already spoken about. I think is absolutely revolting. And I think, yeah, there's nothing else for me more to say on him other than, I think there is a strong hatred for that man.
Yeah. Let's see. I've got a summary of his comments for the first interview that he made to Cadena SUR. Cadena Sir, sorry. I wanted to credit the radio station who had him on. Let's see. I mean, goodness. There was I've never seen such aggression from the UEFA president. He's obviously talking about Alex Seferin, who we've actually not discussed yet, but obviously the personal stakes as well, which makes it such a compelling story about how I think he's is he the godfather to Agnelli's child, or Agnelli's the godfather to his child? I can't remember which way around it is, but like there's sort of a personal relationship between Ceferin and Agnelli. Joe, you look at me. So, are you confused? Have you not heard that one before? Or
I feel like I've heard about this, but it just seemed so Italian football cliche
No,
that I sort of glossed over it. But no, I can completely believe that.
No, it is true, which is why I guess when this whole thing sort of came out, there was a lot of comments about betrayal and snakes, and I think Ed Woodward was also called a snake or something, because I think both had discussed the UEFA Champions League reforms, which we'll get onto prior to then announcing they were going to then back the Super League and go against the Champions League. So yeah, I'm trying to find this. Yes, Agnelli's daughter's godfather is Ceferin. There we go. I found that's the exact sort of relationship there. But anyway, back to Florentino Perez. Never seen such aggression from UEFA president. Says the first English team, which we believe is referring to Chelsea, said had doubts and then sort of infected the rest of the other teams with their doubts. I believe he said when commenting on the Chelsea fans' protest, he was like there was about 30 to 40 fans, which felt very, and I don't want to get too political, but it felt very Donald Trumpian in terms of describing his inauguration crowd, because those numbers were widely off the mark. The 12 teams have signed a binding contract. You cannot just leave. Obviously, he's talked a lot about how there's a big payment that these clubs are going to have to make to void the contract, which, again, I don't think that fallout is still yet to play out. We have no idea. We have to do it now. Money comes from good matches, so there's competition. Let's see, 16 to 24-year-olds are not interested in football, which is, I think, the big one, at least for me. That was quite the one that I sort of wasn't very, I don't know, that one was quite aggravating. I'm reading it off. You can find articles about his comments. I think the Athletics La Liga correspondent Dermot Corrigan tweeted along to a lot of them, so you could probably find those threads, super detailed. But Joe, what Florentino Perez?
Yeah, was it Florentino Perez or Andrea Agnelli? Sorry for interrupting. There's a bit of a delay. Which one of them was it that said that 16 to 24-year-olds are more interested in Fortnite than football? Because ironically, the Super League did become a knockout-style battle royale before the end of it. The great irony in this. Well,
here's the thing. Perez, to my memory, and this is, I might have got this mixed up, but to my memory, Perez said 16 to 24-year-olds, and I think Agnelli said he said like 15 to 24-year-olds or like 18 to 24-year-olds. Like they were talking about, I know it's a very pernickety detail, but it clearly showed they weren't on side with each other in terms of their messaging, because like if you can't get that detail uniform, then yeah, just a PR disaster. Like I don't think that neither of them were like sort of on page with each other step by step in terms of putting out that message about young people. But to your point, I think one of them, if not both of them, talked about Fortnite and Call of Duty as being rivals to, I don't know, young people's attention spans. I think one of them, and I think it was Agnelli, talked about how maybe games needed to have shorter halves or something along those lines to fit the perception that apparently we have a lesser captive span than older people, which is a fun idea to knock around. But yeah, do you have any thoughts? I mean, do you have any further reaction on Florentino Perez and anything he's said over the last couple days?
Literally, it's a very quick comment. The only thing I can say about this is just take my perspective on it. And I'm not claiming to be a representative of 16 to 24-year-olds in this county, this country, anywhere, not even of my own family. I'm 23 now. Post 16 to now is when I have been more interested and devoted in following football than ever before. I followed football since I was 5-6 years old. These are the few years where I've been the most interested in it. Video games, by comparison, these are the years where I have been the least interested in them. That's just me, but it's pretty clear that Florentino Perez and Andrea Agnelli have no idea about our age demographic.
Ben, you wanted to weigh in on this?
Yeah, can I just say that they really don't have any idea, because I've just checked my notes and I study psychology degree. The attention span thing, that's not true. That is actually completely false. It is the other way around. 18 to 24-year-olds, or it's actually sort of 18 to 27, have a better attention span than anyone who's over 50, than anyone who's over 40. That's a fact. So they are actually, yeah, they are just 100% wrong there.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of joked that their market research was probably like their ball boys or whoever they have working for them at the club, because I just didn't really know. Like, it's just bad business. Like, even if it wasn't football, it's just bad. If they were just owners, I don't know, just owners in any other business, it's just bad market research. Like, goodness. But yes, I think we, you can follow our Twitter by the video description. We tweeted out an invitation to Mr. Perez if he wanted to come on one of our shows and talk about these things with 16 to 24-year-olds interested in football. So far we have not got any response, but the invitation is very open. If not from myself, maybe whoever comes in after me as the head of sport, I'm sure would love to have that exclusive. So, you know, if he wants to get some proper market research, he can come to us. But yeah, I like with a lot of these executives, I think a lot of them are hiding behind their managers. So I don't think we're going to hear from them. But anyway, I don't know what, I mean, I think that's really it in terms of fallout. In terms of, I mean, we can talk about, let's talk about the future of the concept before moving on to sort of the Champions League reforms. We've sort of touched on it. Ben, you've sort of said you don't think this is going to go away. What do you? I know it's very hard to make sort of predictions on this, but what do you feel is going to happen with this concept? Do you think it will come back in a couple of years' time? Do you think, there'll be different clubs maybe involved in this concept? What do you think is the future of this Super League concept?
I see it. I look at it in two ways. In one way, I think we're destined for doom, and I think it will happen, or something similar will happen. But I think in my positive kind of outlook on it, I think it's a race. I think there is definitely an independent regulator, I think, sort of run by people like Gary Neville, and he's been working on that. And I think the government would be also interested in that, and potentially Premier League clubs as well. I think it's a race between that getting done and something else happening. These clubs will come back again. They will probably sack their PR advisors, because I think, and deservedly, because I think what an awful time turnout's it. Which also, I forgot to say earlier as well, was on a No Room for Racism campaign day. So, they not only kind of stamped on the coronavirus thing, but they stamped on that, which is lovely. But yeah, I think it is definitely a race between an independent regulator coming in and maybe sorting something out, because for me that seems like the most realistic thing. I don't think these owners are going to sell. As much as I would love the Glazers to sell, Kroenkes to sell, anyone to sell, I just think, because we've had this pandemic, they don't want to sell right now. They want to get the economy going a bit more. They'll want to get a little bit more money in, and then they'll want to sell. It's all about maximizing profit for them. It's nothing to do with when is good footballing. They are not bothered by fans protesting. They are honestly not bothered at all. They never have been. And I think you can see that by the sort of statements they've released and their behavior over the course of this. So I don't think it's, as much as I want it to happen, I don't think it's realistic that the owners will sell. I think it will be, they'll try and do this again. I'm 100% sure. Obviously, we don't know the sort of ins and outs of the sort of contracts that were signed and things, and we don't know if they are bound or, what's going to happen there. So I think that will play a big role as well, depending on what happens. I mean, as well, the lawyers involved for this, they're on a big payday as well, which is maybe another slight issue, that all of this is happening and they're going to get paid a lot. But I still think, yeah, I think for me, the most sort of thing that I think could happen is an independent regulator coming in. But I still think that time's not on our hands. Every day, I think, every day for me in the future is a step closer to another European Super League happening. And I think, it won't rest until these owners are booted out of this country and football, to quote Gary Neville again.
Yeah, and I mean, the second, Joe, I'll give you sort of final sort of viewpoint on the concepts. I think, I mean, it's sparking a lot of important conversation, isn't there? About, I know a lot of attention because obviously the Bundesliga didn't get involved in all of this. I know there's been a lot of attention on the 50+1 model. There are, as someone who sort of follows German football quite closely, there are a lot of obviously pros to it. There are also cons to it. You know, it's not an attractive league for foreign investors, for example, because you don't have the majority of voting rights. So why would an American businessman or someone like that want to invest in a club where they don't have the majority of voting rights, for example, or things like that. And obviously there are certain clubs who are able to sort of bypass the 50+1 rule. RB Leipzig, and actually there are three others: Leverkusen, Wolfsburg, and Hoffenheim. Also, I'll just quickly say it would be very hard to persuade club owners to give up their voting rights now that they've already bought the clubs. It's going to be very hard to reverse engineer a model that's already sort of very much embellished in English football. So while I know, because I know there's a petition going around, obviously, to get the 50+1 model sort of debated in Parliament and maybe regulatory change there, I would throw caution. It would be very difficult. And to be clear, it doesn't, upend foreign investment, because like Bayern Munich, for example, Adidas has an 8% stake in Bayern Munich, and so does Allianz as well. Like, they are still able to have, companies invest in them. But anyway, that's maybe that's a discussion for another day. But that's just my 2 cents on if that model will be good for English football. But Joe, before we talk about the Champions League and what reforms they've introduced, any sort of final words on the Super League and the future of the concept?
This may be a long one. Just quickly on the German thing in particular, it's worth remembering as well that not only is the 50+1 rule so ingrained, but as far as I understand it, Germany's like corporation taxes and business taxes are so much higher than the UK's. Apparently the UK can't raise theirs because it would do damage to the economy. The Germans seem to be doing all right with it, and as you say, it is protecting the interests of football down to a working class level, all the way down the German football pyramid. Personally, I think the European Super League, it's not dead by any means, partly because the two big bad wolves of Agnelli and Perez are still involved, but it has hit a major setback because the clubs that we thought would join, I don't think anyone really expected Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund to join. I was pretty surprised when Rasenballsport Leipzig came out so strongly against it. I was even more surprised when Paris Saint-Germain, for political reasons or not, came out against it. Clubs like Lyon, Marseille, who have been devastated by what the pandemic has done to French television rights and desperately need as much prize money as possible, they came out against it. Clubs wider in Italy and Spain, like clubs like Sevilla, Roma, Lazio, clubs that, well, not so much Lazio, but clubs that would benefit massively from being in the league, proportionally speaking, in terms of money, they've come out so strongly against it. It would be pretty hypocritical and difficult of those ownership groups to renege on that in a couple of years' time. And actually, although it's not as much of a footballing power, the clubs in Portugal weren't even interested. Porto and Benfica came out strongly against it. So the interest in the Super League is relegated to 3 countries. How can you call that a Super League? It's barely any better than what Major League Baseball does, calling it the World Series, because one team is based in Canada, the other 29 are in the United States of America. What's worrying to me is not so much, the future of the project. It's the fact that none of the teams have been punished for this in any meaningful way. And this isn't just it isn't just restrained to the 6 teams in the Premier League. My personal wish was for a 30-point deduction, effective immediately for every club that had signed up in every league. I've heard a lot of people actually calling for a lot more than that, not least European bans. I was thinking 1 year plus any teams remaining in European competitions this year. I've had people calling for 5-7 year bans. And what's really worrying is that for me, if you're going to argue, and people like Chris Williams, who we interviewed last year, were tweeting along the lines of that they were hearing a lot of reports and discussions in UEFA that there was serious discussions and serious support for kicking these clubs out and punishing them heavily. The thing is that this was argued as a kind of bargaining chip, the same as UEFA saying that players wouldn't be able to represent their countries. The clubs jumped first. That puts UEFA in a very unusual position of power against them. Why they have the power to do this? The Super League is dead for the moment. It's not like these clubs can easily go and rejoin it. They've already jumped. So why not punish them when you have the power to do so and the clubs are basically at your mercy? If you're so strongly against them, it just proves what I've been saying for so bloody long, that the interests of UEFA are so financial and so centred around, in particular, the big six English clubs, but also the super clubs from especially Spain and to a lesser extent Juventus. The final point on this is I can't speak for the fans because in this country, in Spain and Italy, they've been fantastic against this. I'd encourage anyone actually to read, this is the first time I'll ever endorse them, but the AC Milan Ultra statement about this, which is heavily against the Super League, but also is pretty damn revealing about the nature of the Champions League. I am very worried by how quickly British sports broadcasters have tried to sweep this under the rug, even down to Robbie Savage's commentary of the game against Roma the other night, which was quite frankly pathetic. The final comment being, and I've been saying this in private chat, what Graham Souness said after the support from people like Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher to impose points deductions, financial penalties, competition bans on these clubs. Graham Souness coming out literally the day after these clubs turned out to be massive bottle jobs, saying, no, you can't give them points deductions or European bans because that would be against the fans. So when Portsmouth went into administration, at no fault of the fans whatsoever, they got punished and relegated several divisions. That wasn't against the fans at all, was it? Absolutely ridiculous. The thing is, what you've got to remember is that these people are not just pundits. I wouldn't even say Graham Souness is a pundit at all. They're salesmen. They're selling BT Sport, Sky Sports' coverage of a league. What league do they cover? The English Premier League. They have every interest in protecting the interests of those clubs. The coefficient, which is now the highest in Europe, they don't care about the fans either. This goes a lot further than the owners and the concept of the Super League. Like, there are serious problems in football in general, especially in this country, and the big money does not just extend to the big clubs. It is the TV broadcasters as well. There's a long way to go before this is fixed.
I will say further to your point, Sky Sports, who engineered, as I think you and I talked about, have engineered a breakaway league in the Premier League itself in 1992. So it's important to have that in mind, I guess, with regards to their coverage. There was something I was going to say, but I've sort of forgotten it. Oh yes, no, I've seen some stuff about like how maybe like reports about how, and this isn't an attack against the journalists who wrote the articles, but they sort of said maybe, John Henry should fund some sort of summer transfer spree to, appease fans. But I feel like that's, I mean, that would be sort of what the owners want, wouldn't they? To sort of sweep this under the rug. It's like, look, we got this fancy signing here that, we bought with the money we're paying, we're putting into the club. And we can get more of these if we sign up to a Super League. So, that's
just what Arsenal, Chelsea, United, and God knows how many more have been doing for years already, Super League or not. It won't change anything.
Yeah. And also, I just wanted to say the fact that, there was one sentence in regards to what the women's teams of those clubs would do in terms of a Champions League. That's ridiculous. I know it's unfortunate we don't cover as much women's football on this channel, but it's ridiculous that they just reduced to one sentence, particularly with the recent announcement that the broadcast deal with the BBC and Sky for the Women's Super League, which is going to be great and obviously get them a lot more attention and a lot more coverage. It's ridiculous to then have them reduced to one sentence. I know, so I don't know. That's my 2 cents on that. But anyway, we'll jump into what the Champions League did, what UEFA did. And as I publicly tweeted, UEFA, the best thing they could have done was to do nothing because they were winning. It's sort of because the Super League was become a villain that everyone quickly hated. Their best position would have been to do nothing, and they would have been still heralded as a hero. But the fact that they've put in these reforms, it sort of ruined it a little bit. I'm sorry, I am just putting up the reforms. So here, let me read them out very briefly for those who don't know. There will be an expanded Champions League from 2024. 36 teams. So currently we have 24. So there'll be 8 more teams involved. What would happen was the 36 clubs will qualify for the first phase, and I don't entirely. I mean, that's just what I'm reading off, where they will all play 10 opponents of varying strengths. I'm just reading the BBC article. There'll be a sort of a round robin league table, and the top 2 then there's sort of the top 8 would then go into the knockout phase, and then the remaining 16. The next 16 would then go into a playoff for the remaining 8 slots. And it's interesting, 2 of the sort of 4 added slots would be allocated on pedigree in the competition of their Champions League history. So, for example, since it's looking that way, if Liverpool were not make it, for example, they would have a chance of being allocated that spot. Maybe, I know AC Milan have sort of fallen off a little bit in Serie A. If they were to not make the Champions League, maybe they would find themselves in it as well. So that's in a nutshell. You can obviously find, yes, Joe, Red Star Belgrade would love it. You could, Saint Etienne, maybe Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa. Let's just put them all in. But I guess you can find the reforms if you Google them, obviously. But the takeaway is that there will be more games. So in a bigger group stage, and presumably more money for the clubs involved as well. So, and those 2 of those 4 spots being awarded to teams not on merit, but on pedigree. So let's just quickly, I mean, we don't have to deep dive into it too much, but Ben, quick reaction. What do you think about the Champions League also introducing reforms that are not that dissimilar from the Super League, to be honest? Just different competition, but not that dissimilar.
No, exactly. Regarding the pedigree, it's exactly the same as the Super League, sort of taking away the competition aspect of football. And I just think, I say this, football is a sport. Sports are meant to be competitive. So if football's no longer competitive, football's not a sport. So that really sums up that bit there. I also think in terms of fixture congestion, I mean, in this year, surely it has shown people that it is not just physically exhausting, it is mentally exhausting for these players. They haven't even been consulted on there. I think this is the 3rd time on this sort of podcast I've called to see some players consulted or come out and tell us about the mental exhaustion they're going through, because they will be. There's been so many unnecessary games, and it almost seems absolutely ludicrous again to sort of make these changes and announce this in a year when fixture congestion has been such a problem for so many teams and so many individual players, and their mental health and physical health. So I think it's utterly ridiculous. And like you said, Josh, they literally just, if they said nothing, they'd have surprisingly come out pretty well from this, but they've gone and ruined it. And I think I'd like to quote, I think, Mike Calvin on the BT Sport Writers podcast. He said, look, so we have our current Champions League, and by no means is it perfect, but it's definitely good enough. And I think that's exactly what every football fan will say. It's not perfect, but the current Champions League format we've got, it's good enough.
Yes, this is obviously, so, I mean, the model we've sort of outlined is what has been regarded as the Swiss model. Not sure why Swiss has been attached to it, but that's sort of been the name for it. And obviously, yes, Ceferin, obviously, funny enough, Agnelli and Woodward had a hand in these changes as well, which then they willingly ditched, but that's another story. It was interestingly, and I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, but Nasser Al-Khalifi, is that how you pronounce the PSG's chairman's? I don't know. The PSG chairman and Karl-Heinz Rummenigge have replaced Agnelli and Woodward in the ECA. So when I'm being early on, I sort of alluded to PSG and Bayern making gains politically, that's sort of, they are now in a stronger position to sort of comment on reforms being made to the Champions League. So that's how they've gained. But anyway, Joe, you sort of heard the reforms sort of outlined there for the Champions League. Any thoughts?
I still don't know what the structure, in terms of group stages, round robins, when it becomes a knockout. I've listened to it a few times. I can't bring myself to read it because European football's just been a disaster this year. But it reminds me of the days when there were like 2 group stages and just how unbelievably boring it was. I don't like the way the Champions League is at the moment anyway, partly because my club's never in it, but mainly because I think it's ludicrous to call something the Champions League when 3rd and 4th place teams from the UK, Germany, Italy, etc. are allowed in. And, the clubs that win in Serbia, Montenegro, Ukraine aren't immediately in, despite the fact it's apparently a pan-European competition. I understand there's financial interest involved. What a surprise. We've been discussing about them all the way through the show. Yeah, I mean, as Ben says, if there's no competition, it's no longer a sport. And the truth is that the clubs that would get in are not clubs that once won the Champions League, like Steaua Bucharest, Red Star Belgrade, as I said, Nottingham Forest, how amazing that would be. It will be, the massive clubs that will... Basically, if the club is in favour of the Super League, they will also be in favour of these reforms, which to me says that we haven't even won a battle. Like the fans had nothing to do with the Super League going down the drain. That was entirely down to financial incentives down the line, if not straight away. And also because these clubs will be pretty damn happy with these reforms to the Champions League. Maybe they're not everything they want, but they certainly benefit them quite a lot. I've been really annoyed about the fact the Nations League is going on this year. I like it as a competition, don't get me wrong, but this year of all years, no. Like needless international friendlies that have exhausted players, especially at these top clubs. And as Ben says, the fixture congestion's been bad enough this year. It's one thing when you have the TV money behind you and getting away with FFP breaches to have these massive squads full of great players. But for other clubs in Europe that constantly overperform relative to their financial size, like Ajax Amsterdam, who I love, that's going to be seriously difficult for them. I mean, they've been hit by injuries pretty badly, but clubs like them, Club Bruges, even clubs over in Russia and Ukraine, they're going to be devastated by the extra fixture congestion. Again, the power is going to the same clubs that would have benefited from the Super League and were members of the Super League. So it's not a victory at all. It's just a slightly smaller loss.
The lesser of 2 evils, as some may describe. And indeed, that thing about sport, sport isn't a sport if there's no competition. I think Pep Guardiola has sort of said a line to that effect as well. So, and I think Ilkay Gundogan and Jurgen Klopp have both sort of cautioned against these Champions League reforms as well. I don't have the exact tweet in front of me, but will be very interesting to see how, because I think those changes are locked in, right? There's no going back on those. So we now just have to see what happens. But at least we have 3 more years of the existing formats before we can sort of start worrying about it. But anyway, I think we've pretty much run amok on the Super League and Champions League. Speaking of the Champions League, maybe we roll into some of the on-field action, thank goodness, that we had earlier this week. I personally, I sort of watched those games from afar. I didn't really have too close a personal attachment to it, but Real Madrid, Chelsea 1-1 in the first leg, and then you had Manchester City coming from behind to beat PSG. Actually, I did watch that game, but did either of you watch? And I know I should have asked you before, but did either of you watch the 2 games or one of the 2 games?
It sounds petulant, but no. In my opinion, neither of those games should have gone ahead because there is only one team that are still interested in UEFA's version of European football. Right. I know it sounds rubbish, but the idea of PSG just being given, like, there are like the calls that, PSG should be the only team left of the Champions League, Europa should go to a Roma BRL final. I don't like sidestepping competition, but these clubs should not still be in European competitions. So quite frankly, I had no interest in watching either of the games. Apparently Mason Mount was good.
No, fair enough. Like, you could have seen a Final Four of maybe, I don't know, if they really went ahead with kicking those 3 clubs out of the Champions League, what would happen? I guess Bayern Munich would be recalled, I guess, maybe. Or Dortmund or Porto or all those other clubs that made... What?
We could have PSG versus Bayern Munich for the 4th time in a year. How amazing would that be?
Hey, that I mean, I know we went on there to cover it, but that 2-legged tie was a fantastic tie. Ben, did you watch either of the two games or also give it a miss?
Yeah, no, I watched a little bit of them. What I'd say is probably the main points to take from them are Real Madrid very lucky to be in the position they're in. They're not in a bad position at all, can still go through, but play appallingly. And PSG, Man City, I mean, a game of two halves. I was absolutely astounded the amount of space that PSG had. I think it's the most I've ever seen in a Man City game under Pep Guardiola. And I think I could tell as I was sitting there and I was watching it with my brother, I was saying if they only go into half time with one goal, they're going to regret that, because a Pep Guardiola team doesn't go in at half time and then come out and play the same way. And yeah, they completely nullified the problem. It looks like they will probably go through. I said this from the start with Manchester City. I think they'll win the final. It's getting to the final that's the difficult bit for them.
Yeah, I will say I only watched a PSG City game. PSG's downfall in discipline was sort of staggering to watch. Like Idrissa Gana Gueye's tackle was horrendous. It's not what you do when you're chasing a game that you've just fallen behind in. And Keylor Navas has obviously been brilliant this season for PSG, but just 2 goals that he shouldn't really have let in. But hey, we'll see what happens in the second legs for those games. And as for Chelsea Real Madrid, I think it's just well poised, isn't it? And we'll see. I mean, we'll see who goes through. But
sorry, just quickly, Real Madrid have been battered with injuries, though. That is the one caveat to make. Like, even Danny Carvajal's out for the rest of the season now. Like, I don't have sympathy for them. Oh my God, never believe I have sympathy for Real Madrid, but they have been put in a terrible position. Not just because the top of La Liga is also insane at the moment. And
even like Nacho and Eder Militao have been brilliant at the back for them while Sergio Ramos has been out. Let's shift gears to Europa League, because I think that's the competition we're most interested in on this panel. Manchester United Roma. Ben, I'll let you go first. Your emotions at at half time, when I think United were behind, and then second half sort of let the fireworks go off. So what was your take on that game?
Yeah, I saw an Instagram post and it said about sort of Manchester United fans, and it's a pattern to every single game throughout the first half. You're screaming at the TV, you're saying Solskjaer out, you're saying we're awful, we need to sign so many players. Then at the end of the game, you're just like, yeah, that's right, we can win the league, we're amazing. And it's because it's the same pattern. We are such a second half team, and I really don't understand it. I'd really love to understand more why. But I think, and you know what, I really felt sorry for Roma, because I know that Joe has spoken before about Roma having injury troubles, and I had no idea sort of about the ins and outs of it. But I saw 3 players in the first half, including your goalkeeper, go off. I was feeling really bad, but then I also felt disgusted at Manchester United, the fact that you did have 3 players go off, and I was sat there thinking, okay, we're losing currently, and they've had 3 people go off. So I think, in that sense, my first reaction was I was thinking, semi-final curse. But then I think, sort of the floodgates opened, unfortunately for Roma. Edison Cavani was fantastic, proving what a amazing signing he's been. And I think he just links the attack together. I think for Manchester United fans, Edison Cavani's kind of opened our eyes to sort of show that Martial probably not the man to win a striker. And I think, especially when sort of the only real strikers on the market this summer is Haaland and arguably potentially Harry Kane, which are going to cost 100 million plus. I think Manchester United strengthen other areas, so being able to tie Edison Cavani down, I think, would be a fantastic deal for Manchester United. But I think it was well placed. Bruno Fernandes, I think at the back, still a lot of questions there. I think in the goal that Roma scored, that wasn't the penalty, it was appalling defending. But I think, this Manchester United team, it's looking positive for them. I think as well, they're not as reliant on Bruno Fernandes. I know he played really well in that match, but Paul Pogba stepped up. And most importantly, Luke Shaw creates an unbelievable amount of chances, the same amount of chances as Lionel Messi this season. So I think, Luke Shaw is doing excellently. Definitely my favourite player for Man United at the moment. So I think, generally a positive for Manchester United. Hopefully can rotate some players into the next fixture. But yeah, I did feel sorry for Roma with the injuries in the first half, because I saw it firsthand.
There we go. Luke Shaw being your favorite Manchester United player is a sentence I would not have predicted a long time ago, especially when those reports came out of him being slightly overweight or whatever reports were being made about him. Joe, your perspective on United Roma?
Yeah, I was having a really bad day before the game anyway, so the one of all the nights for Roma to put in a disaster class, that was not the one I needed. My man of the match, just quickly, I thought Paul Pogba was absolutely incredible. Personally, I agree with what Chris Smalling said after the game. The Man United penalty that came off of Smalling was not a penalty. Cavani was not in possession of the ball. That should never be given as a penalty. But also, the Roma penalty in the first half was legitimate, but also fairly soft. It's not like the referees were completely against us, as they have been so often. Going into the half, I wasn't even excited at half time, just because, yeah, United were a second half team, but they were so much better in the first half. I mean, the possession alone, I knew that it was going to be some fairly anti-football from Roma, but even then, you could just see United's quality coming through. Bruno Fernandes, clearly not just, a flash in the pan, a genuinely great footballer, and Cavani as well. And the thing is, I've actually been very impressed by the Manchester United fans that I've spoken to, at least, not necessarily representative of the fan base, understanding how bad the injuries were. I mean, losing Jordan Veretout in midfield, I think Veretout is our best player, even when Zaniolo's fit. He's just that important. Losing him is devastating. Paul Lopez, who has really been good in goal against all the detractors, and then putting in Mirante, who should probably retire after that game, honestly. And also Spinazzola, who's been a revelation this year as well, proving why he was such a great signing originally. But all of those things, all those injuries put together, the inability to make in-match changes, because although there's 5 substitutions, you're only allowed to make 3 in regulation play. So we didn't have any subs for the second half. The lack of squad depth going into it, like we couldn't even fill our bench if you look at the lineups ahead of the game. And of course, the bogus penalty. None of those things, even put together, explain what we saw in that second half. That was the worst performance I have ever seen from Antonio Mirante in goal, who I used to think was one of the best backups in Europe. I was really excited when we signed him, old though he was. Chris Smalling, I don't know who's paying his wages. It might well still be Manchester United. I don't know what happened to the player we had on loan last year, but that signing has been a disaster this year. That worst player on the pitch. But it wasn't just him. Like Gonzalo Biar, who I've sung the praises of ever since signing him from Elche, he'd never had a bad game, or even below good game for Roma until then. 3 out of 10 performance. But above all else, you're leading at half-time, undeserved, away from home, in a knockout fixture against Manchester United, and you still play a defensive high line in the second half, and the first goal you concede from Cavani came off of a counter-attack. The injuries don't explain that. Roma absolutely deserved to lose that badly. I am not going to make any excuses whatsoever. That is probably the worst performance I've seen from them in 8 years or so. And that includes the 7-1 against Bayern Munich and the 7-1 against Fiorentina in the Cup, which I also watched live there.
I hate to say it, but like Roma have a history of big score lines that they've lost to in the Champions League, especially recently. Liverpool fans will remember. Barcelona, am I correct? Will remember? Oh no, you knocked out Barcelona. Okay, wrong one. My memory.
There was a bad defeat against Barcelona. Though I think it was a 6-1 in the group stage a couple of years before.
Okay,
that.
Maybe that's the one I'm thinking of, not the knockout tie in which then you knocked them out. But anyway, yes. Chris Smalling being a bad signing. Well, United fans could have told you that. I will say that. But I mean, last season he looked so good, and then this season it's
I can't explain it. The thing is that I was speaking to, again, Luke Edwards, who was very excited about the way the first half went because he hates Manchester United as much as I do. And he was looking at Smalling's injury record. He was spotless before he came to Roma last year, like barely ever injured at Manchester United. Joins us on loan, and the first 3 or 4 weeks is out with an injury immediately. Comes into the squad and is amazing. But this year, he has had legs made of glass. I honestly can't explain it, because I know he wasn't training with Manchester United last summer, and because the move went at the 11th hour on deadline day, it very nearly didn't go through. I know those couple of months out from proper training would hurt him, but even so, it just does not explain what has happened to him injury-wise. And it's not like a couple of years ago where most of the injuries at the club were impact injuries, like LCL tears, ACL tears. We had so many of those. This is like moderate muscular problems. That's on the physios. That's not on bad luck. Something needs to change there.
Well, it's I think it's going to be quite a task to overturn it in the second leg, if ever. It's going to be one of those classic Roman European nights. I think Fonseca sort of alluded to that. So I'm sure we'll talk about it. I think next week, right? The second legs are next week.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll talk about
it. If Fonseca still has his job by then. Seriously.
Okay. All right. Well, that's one to look out for. The other semi-final, which I'm guessing neither of you watch because you obviously your eyes on Old Trafford. Arsenal losing to Villarreal, the Unai Emery derby. It was not a good evening for Arsenal. And yeah, I mean, I didn't watch the game. I don't know if did you guys catch the highlights or not?
Yeah, I saw the highlights.
And what did you make of the game briefly?
Not good. Not a good evening to be an Arsenal fan. It was bad. It was really bad. And I tell you what, I laugh, and I don't mean to laugh in a mean way, but Danny Ceballos, I mean, what was Arteta doing not taking him off the pitch? The couple minutes before he got sent off, I've never seen a player looking more like he was going to get sent off. He was like a GTA character going around trying to kick people. It was bad. And then he got sent off, and it was no surprise whatsoever. So I think what most Arsenal fans are saying is they're happy because, like Real Madrid with Chelsea, they are lucky that they are only they've got an away goal and they're 2-1 down, and they can bring this back, because that performance, I mean, that makes me want Manchester United Arsenal final if they play like that. Because yeah, it was bad, and unfortunately with Arsenal it's the same old. And also I'd love to question Arteta, but why Granit Xhaka's playing fullback? Because I know that you've got Cedric and Bellerin. I'm sorry, this is consistently one of the worst central midfielders in the Premier League. I don't know what makes you think he'll be a good fullback, and I think that literally gives a blueprint to the opposition saying attack that area. How the hell is Granit Xhaka gonna be able to keep up with Marcus Rashford or any sort of reasonably fast winger? So I'd question him there. So I think, yeah, not a good night for Arsenal at all.
Granit Xhaka's long legs? I don't really know. I'm just trying to throw a bone out there for Arteta. But obviously, you as a United fan obviously had this when, was it Fred who got sent off after in another European game, having, looked dangerously close to walking that tightropes? And obviously, I think there was another instance of, I think Pogba nearly had that, and Solskjaer obviously learned and subbed him off or something at halftime. So you as a United fan have obviously gone through that, and now Arteta's obviously learning about that part of the of management as well. So of in-game management rather. So yeah, it's funny, as a neutral, I had a tweet ready about how Roma and Villarreal were playing for those Super League spots against United and Arsenal. Obviously, I didn't send it, and in the end, Roma disappointed that side of the tweet. So I'm glad I refrained from it. And for those who are listening on the podcast, Joe has slid off camera in I don't know, disdain. I don't really know.
Any suggestion that we deserve to be in a European Super League is ridiculous. Like, people say, we've got more history than Arsenal, Tottenham. We've won the league 3 times in almost 100 years.
Okay.
There are so many clubs in Europe that deserve it more than us. I'll be the first to admit.
Atalanta, maybe, although Agnelli doesn't rate them as a big teom.
Yeah, they finished top 4, but they don't deserve to qualify for the Champions League, apparently.
Well,
Agnelli's
anyway.
logic.
Well, yeah, that's that. Let's round off. I mean, he is a big name, and I feel like we should comment on it. Jose Mourinho is now out of a job. Coincidentally, a lot of people put together that maybe it was fueled by the Super League. I never bought into those, and it's emerged that was never sort of a thing. But anyway, He's out of a job. It's funny how in December, I think they were near the top of the table and we thought maybe there was a chance. And obviously that was when Gareth Bale, who has been largely left on the sidelines a lot this season, that was when he first sort of looked like I wouldn't say vintage Gareth Bale, but he looked close to it, maybe. But Ben, as someone who's gone through the Jose Mourinho experience, I bet you're not surprised to see it kind of collapse the way it has, although maybe not as quickly, because normally he has 2 good seasons and then he sort of then falls off.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised Jose Mourinho getting sacked. And the timing, I mean, before a League Cup final, I think Harry Kane came out and said in an interview and did say, yeah, it was a bit odd because we were working towards it. And I do think that is odd. The only thing I can think of is why they sacked him before that cup final is if there's a clause in his contract, which would not surprise me, saying if Jose Mourinho wins a trophy, his contract gets extended, he gets more wage, something like that. That's the only thing I can think of that would make sense to sack them there, because I mean, that Tottenham performance in the final, I don't think you could have expected any more from Ryan Mason, but I still think you'd have been better off going in with Jose Mourinho, no matter how sort of unhappy the squad was. But yeah, I think it's the same story with Jose. And you know what? People say his tactics are outdated. I don't believe his tactics are outdated. I don't believe there's this whole thing about defensive football doesn't work. I don't buy that at all. But I think what it is I think his man management style, I think that is quite clearly outdated. You can't rub that many players up the wrong way. It literally gets to the point where there are more players who are against him, which, I mean, I think as soon as you really sort of look at kind of 1 or 2 players. And I also think if you sort of sideline players like Winks, Dele Alli, Gareth Bale, if you kind of sort of oppose those players, then I think that's not just those individual players there, that's their social groups. The people interact, there's social groups to a squad. So of course, you know, people are going to be talking about you behind your back as Jose Mourinho and things like that. And I think ultimately that leads to the downfall. But yeah, same old story. I mean, he sort of we've seen how good Luke Shaw is, and I think that's sort of nice that comes out, like that Luke Shaw's form is sort of come at the same time as this, because I think that does so Jose's wrong. I think the only sad thing from this really is that probably Jose Mourinho won't be in the Premier League again, and obviously he has had some historically great moments, but I think, yeah, definitely not surprised that he was going to get sacked. I think everyone knew he would, but maybe a week before a cup final, a little surprising.
Well, he won't be involved in the Premier League. He'll be commenting on the Premier League because I think he's signed to TalkSport, if I'm correct. And obviously he does all those Paddy Power ads. So he's still very much linked to the marketing of the Premier League. But yeah, I mean, obviously I know the Pochettino reign towards the end, team chemistry obviously turned a bit for the worse, but for the most part, it was one very big happy family, and that's quickly sort of disappeared, funny enough. So call that the Mourinho effect, or maybe not, I don't know. Joe, any brief comment on Mourinho going? Because I don't think, like I said, I don't think their form, once, you know, you looked at their form, it wasn't a huge surprise, but the timing obviously was. And I don't know, do you have any suggestions for who might come into the role?
I mean, the situation at Tottenham at the moment, you know, Erik ten Hag, the Ajax manager, was their number 1 target, and I can completely understand why, considering the attacking potential that Tottenham have that Jose just doesn't like. Erik ten Hag's just signed a new contract with Ajax and has expressed a vocal desire on club communications to continue working with the club, so that's not going to happen. Not only is Jose Mourinho working for TalkSport, Josh, he's also signed up, I believe, a contract to cover football for The Sun, because after working in English football for so many years, Jose Mourinho believes that they are the 2 most popular radio and newspapers to work for the fans. That's going to make him even more unpopular. The only thing to say about this, and I don't want to rag on Tottenham Hotspur fans because I've done enough of that over the last few years, the Jose pattern, come in the first year, see what's wrong, successful in the second, fail in the third. That's what happens when he is at a top club in those divisions. Chelsea, Manchester United, Porto, Real Madrid. Tottenham Hotspur, on paper, were never a top club in the Premier League. Not under Pochettino, despite all the hype they had, and certainly not with the squad they had under Jose Mourinho. This was an upper mid-table team that Jose Mourinho was never going to be able to take to the next level. Doomed from the start. Surprised it happened a week before a cup final, but yeah, it just did not work.
But apparently Super League worthy.
Yeah,
we should add that caveat in. But yeah, you mentioned Ten Hag. Obviously, Nagelsmann's been linked for a while, but it's become evident that Nagelsmann used that interest as leverage, which I don't blame him for. Obviously, people may or may not know he's headed to Bayern. Bundesliga managerial changes. I could do a whole podcast on that because there's been if those who haven't been following, there's been a complete merry-go-round. I think 5 managerial vacancies are being like swapped around between club to club and sporting directors and all sorts of craziness, which has made football, for me at least, has made football exhausting. But yes, it'll be interesting to see who Tottenham go for. As I said to you guys before the show, it's rumored they're looking for someone from a younger profile because I know Ralf Rangnick's been linked to every managerial vacancy over the last year, but they're going for someone younger, it seems. So I don't know. It's one of those rare ones where I don't really know who fits the bill. I've heard Graham Potter been thrown around. That could be interesting. But yeah, it's one of those. It's weird how, I guess, we've got to the stage now where Tottenham are sort of they're not high enough for certain managers like an Allegri, for example, but equally they're sort of stuck. Joe, you're nodding along. They're sort of stuck, aren't they?
Do you know what? I really don't, because I know I've spoken more about Roma on this podcast than any before. If they hold out until the summer before appointing a new manager, assuming that Fonseca doesn't keep his job, I can think of far worse, actually, for Tottenham than him. He's a darn sight more exciting than Mourinho and younger.
The one name I was I don't know how interested he'd be, but Lopetegui. I thought he'd be an interesting name. Obviously, doing well at Sevilla. Obviously, Sevilla to Tottenham it's not a sideways move. It's a little bit it is a bit, but it's not a, I don't know. It's me trying to link a successful manager to English football, which is what a lot of people tend to do. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, Ben, do you have a name? Is there a name that comes to, because it's a really hard one to find a name for, to be honest.
Yeah, I thought that I didn't think Jose Mourinho would be sacked this quickly, and I thought that Hasenhüttl would be the natural progression if Southampton carried on their form, sort of almost like the Pochettino model. But I don't think you can take Hasenhüttl. I don't think he'd want it. I think it's also actually outrageous that they thought that Brendan Rodgers would want the role as well. I think that's utterly arrogant. I don't know why the hell he'd go for the Tottenham role when he's at Leicester.
One question, just quickly. You guys said you were laughing off screen when I was speaking. Which controversial comment was it that had you laughing?
No, I didn't know he'd signed to be a columnist for The Sun. For me personally, that's why I was laughing at. I did not know that. I need a TalkSport one, and actually it makes sense because I think TalkSport and The Sun have a sort of relationship, so it makes sense. So it makes sense. I just I don't know. It's not going to compel me to buy The Sun, but I suppose it'll make for some juicy headlines. Another name that has literally just come to mind, the Lille manager Christophe Gaultier, I think would be an interesting one. I probably pronounced his name wrong, but obviously Lille doing well, and apparently Nice are tempting him, which isn't a huge, Lille to Nice isn't a big move. So maybe Tottenham on a bigger budget at Tottenham, that'd be interesting for him. But knowing Tottenham probably won't go for him. I don't know why. I just don't think they'll go. I just don't think it'll be an adventurous pick. I'm just sort of expecting a safe-ish pick, but we'll see. Maybe Ryan Mason. Maybe it'll be like a Tim Sherwood, and Ryan Mason will get the job on a permanent basis.
Tim Sherwood, just his comments on BT Sport, Skype, whichever one it is, I can't remember. Very few pundits rub me up the wrong way more than him.
If Tim Sherwood can manage Tottenham, anyone can manage Tottenham. As someone, I don't know, someone must have said that. But anyway,
can I just jump in? I think it's so unattractive as well, because I think it hinges on, if I was a manager who's going to go into that job, I'd want to say, I want guarantee that Harry Kane will be here, because a Tottenham without Harry Kane is not a top top half team. I genuinely believe that.
No.
But Tottenham without Harry Kane is a very poor team. So I just think it's an unattractive on so many levels.
Yep. With the greatest respect to Carlos Vinicius and Troy Parrott, there no Harry Kane. So yeah, totally agreed. And even, I mean, who knows? I mean, I don't think he'd be the only name considering the exit door. Gareth Bale's obviously made it clear that he's very happy to go back to Madrid and play golf. Dele Alli was obviously linked with PSG for a while, linking back up with Pochettino. I can imagine that's an attractive proposition. Yeah, it could be. It could be one that, it could be an exodus potentially. But anyway, that'll probably call it for us. We've gone into a lot of crazy information about Super League, Champions League reform, obviously the European action we did get this week, and Jose Mourinho's firing and what's next for Tottenham. But that'll do it for us again. As I said, thank you so much to Ben and Joe for coming along. As I said, this will come out on Monday midnight. If you're for YouTube watchers, and for the podcast, it'll come out a bit earlier. Again, in solidarity with the social media boycott that's going on at the moment. But yes, we'll be back next week. We probably will do another F1 special episode because there's a 1 week turnaround between Portimao and Catalunya, and then another Quaran-stream, I guess, where we can finally focus on the action on the field as opposed to off the field, which we've sort of exhausted ourselves into thinking about and talking about. But yep, that'll do it for us again. Like, subscribe to the video, or share and subscribe to the podcast. Social media links in the video description, and for the panelists on that ticker that's been going around for a bit, you can obviously follow them individually there. We will see you soon. So thank you so much.